Welcome to the ADNA Presents. This is Roy Samuelson. Today we're very honored to have writer and audio description writer and producer David Strugar join us. Thank you so much for being here, David.
Thank you, Roy. I'm very happy you invited me on.
Let's jump right in and ask you what you love about audio description.
I love that it makes the experience inclusive for people. I think one of my personal favorite moments was stumbling across someone's blog who had been watching a show that I worked on, and they quoted particular lines that I wrote, and were like, I loved the audio description for this show. I love watching this show, but I can't always get involved until they started doing the audio description, and now I'm getting the full story. And quoting lines that I wrote, I was like, oh, wow, that's that's kind of a big high. I think no matter what kind of project I'm doing, whether it's something big that a lot of people are going to see, or if it's something small that maybe doesn't feel important, that maybe I wouldn't go out of my way to watch, I know there's going to be somebody that's going to appreciate it, that's going to be able to get more involved in what they're watching because there's accessibility for them.
Out the gate, you said the word inclusive. And what I love about the example you gave with the blog is that you're pointing out the recognition of someone literally recognizing what you do in a way that, I think about inclusion as more than just checking the box. We talk about this in countless interviews, and I think you're alluding to this, and I'd like your thoughts on this. When it comes to inclusion, there is something about the writing of audio description that does make a difference as far as the AD audience immersing themselves into the story. The sense of what you do when you're writing audio description, is it just, I'm writing down what's happening on screen, or is there some thought and expertise to it? Could you talk a little bit about your contribution on that side?
We definitely try to match the tone of a show. Not necessarily that we would use slang or like goofy wording for like a comedy, but you might be a little punchier with your wording. For a drama, you can be a little bit longer and more detailed to help set the scene. With genre type of things like a sci-fi or horror or fantasy, there are spectacular things happening on screen, and you want to try to convey that. And you can't just be wordy for word's sake, but you want someone to hear the description of this other world or fantastical monster or something and feel the same sense that you feel when you saw it. I want people to be able to experience the story in real time in a way that makes them feel like I felt when I watched it.
Wow, that's really clear how you said that. I love that. When you think about the two roles that you have, both as an audio description writer and an audio description producer, there's got to be a lot of overlap. Maybe you could talk about some similarities and differences?
Doing just the writing, this isn't true across the board, but writers generally tend to veer introverted. So when you're just concentrating on the description and the writing, it's like, this is my little project and it's just me and this show and my words, and you can make it as special as you want and it's your whole focus. I've been at the job for almost 3 years now, and it was 1 year in that I went for the promotion to post-production supervisor. I do get to write some description from scratch, but I'm also editing other people's work and then going into the recording sessions to produce it. So you end up, obviously, like with any move up like that, you have a bigger picture that you have to keep in mind. And you are editing other people who have been hired because they're good writers too. But if we're all working on the same project, we kind of have to sound alike a little bit. And you don't want to like step on anyone's voice, but it's all got to be consistent. And you want to give feedback that helps people not tell them, well, you described this wrong, but just like, here's a more word economical way to say that, or here's something that fit in the time that we had a little bit better, or here's the way that we were doing these kinds of scenes. There's more to think about. And then also the producing side of it, I'm in the recording sessions with the mixers and the voice talent. And so there are other people to involve, and suddenly it's not just you anymore. You have to have people skills and administrative skills, and there's technical things where you have to deliver the files when you're all done. And if a voice actor is having a little trouble, maybe wrapping their minds around certain phrases or getting into the show, maybe they're having a rough voice day or what have you, you have to help them along. It's very important to be nice to the talent. It was a big, sudden learning curve when I got the promotion. And I remember being put on a particular assignment that lasted for a few weeks where I was like, oh, they're putting me through the fire. Okay, that's all right. We'll get through this. It was a very densely described project, lots of editing and feedback to do. The writing obviously is the nearest and dearest to my heart, the actual sitting down, typing, coming up with the words, because that's like how we all start as writers. It's just us and our words. And then you have to step up and grow up a bit and start working with other people to get your words out to a place where other people can experience them too.
I'd imagine the transition between writing, as you said, introvert, to that juggling act with all the different roles and the people skills and the admin, that juggle act definitely ramped it up for you in spite of the fire challenge, I guess.
Oh, for sure. And to be fair, like I don't think our manager was like trying to punish me. He's not a terribly sadistic person. He's a pretty nice guy. But just the project he picked as I got promoted, I was like, oh, wow, good choice. Here we go.
When you think about the difference, let's compare and contrast your other role as a audio description writer and the other kinds of writing, let's say your feature specs or your series specs, pilots and such. Similarities, differences? I know they're completely different approaches, but what I'm trying to do is find, like, are there some similarities, maybe some core identity things that you find work for both, and maybe some things that you just can't apply one to the other?
I remember one of our senior describer producers who was getting me onboarded and trained when I started, and her big push during that particular conversation was brevity. And I was like, oh yeah, I write screenplays and you have to be very brief. And no, like acting like I knew so much. But audio description really requires you to hone that skill for brevity. You need to get the point across and get it across clearly in time to fit between lines of dialogue. And that really pushed me hard. The first few months was another trial, but lots of fire in this job. I was getting feedback constantly and just noticing how just redundant and lazy, for lack of nicer words, my own writing was. And I need to cut back on that. I can stop using this phrase because it doesn't actually do anything. And my writing as a whole in those first few months just jumped by leaps and bounds, I felt. I noticed it in my projects outside of audio description too. And I didn't expect it to really help because audio description is such a strange animal of its own. You're writing for a very particular purpose, and it doesn't seem like it's going to translate it. You're not really telling your own story. You're telling someone else's story. You're trying to help them tell their story. So it doesn't seem like it would involve a lot of creativity, but it does, because you have to decide how to do that. And like I said earlier, you want to get across the feeling that you had when you watched it. And that does require creativity. It requires creativity to pick the right word to describe the action or the person that's happening. I have, though, noticed in the last couple of specs that I've been working on just a nicer flow. I feel maybe the next person who reads it will disagree, but because so much of my writing for audio description is about the little details in a scene and making sure my audience knows where characters are moving, what they're wearing, that's starting to come out in the scripts that I write. And I feel like it gives a nice texture and detail to my scripts. Again, I think it sounds nice. I hope whoever next reads it will agree. Overall, another idea that, especially when we're getting trained, that we kind of drum at is the idea of sort of backwards engineering our script. We're sort of backwards engineering a radio play in a sense. So we have the dialogue and the sound effects, and then we're adding the action. That can help because I've been working on an audio drama as well as television scripts. And so writing the audio drama feels a lot more natural to me now because I'm used to I need these characters to say this so that I can understand what's happening in the scene. Because if I were an audio describer working on this and it was a visual thing, I would need to say this and this and this. But if they say this and this and this, then I don't have to do that and it remains an audio drama. I didn't expect that there would be spillover from one to the other, but I'm starting to notice that there has been.
And wow, what great examples. You're showing from the brevity to the ease of writing the audio dramas that you originally made a comment about not knowing so much, but you definitely know a lot. That's really great.
I will also say that having to show up and write every day for work is good discipline and practice, especially when most of the time you don't know what the project is that's coming next. It could be anything. It could be a short comedy. It could be a drama. It could be a movie. It could be a game show. It could be anything. And every day you have to sit down and come up with the words to describe it. And aside from the introversion, and I could just be universalizing my own experience again, but writers also struggle with that discipline and sitting down and getting the words out of your head or just staring at that blank page and getting started. Now that I have this practice where rent's got to get paid, so I got to show up and start typing. It's easier when I switch over to my own things. It's like, I can do that. I'll type something. I'll fix it later. I'll come up with something and get going. And that's been a huge boon for me personally.
I like asking a challenge that you're really proud that you overcame. I think you've already given a handful of examples already. Is there anything else that comes to mind if you think about a challenge that you're really proud of how you overcame within your work in audio description?
More than any particular challenge that I had to face, what I really enjoy is learning new things. For any project that we have, we're also striving for accuracy. And so that means looking things up and learning things. If you're doing a period piece, you have to name that style of dress or that architecture. If you're doing something more scientific and you know your audience is going to be attuned to that, we better name these scientific tools and processes correctly. If you're doing a medical drama, you better name that thing correctly. Or I love when I get a documentary about somebody that I knew vaguely from pop cultural osmosis, but I didn't really know that well. And then I learn all of this stuff about them and I'm looking things up, or I'm working on something in another city or country and I'm looking up landmarks to name them as they appear in establishing shots. And I learn all of that. So that's a challenge that I really enjoy. It kind of satisfies the nerdy side of my brain. Like, oh, what fun facts are we going to learn today by working on this project? I really enjoy that. As far as challenges, a lot of stuff I've worked on has had some pretty gnarly action scenes, and those can be so tricky. And I had remembered a screenwriting teacher talking about writing an action scene where you need to find the story even in an action scene. It's not just two people punching each other. It's one person getting the upper hand, one person running this away, or like who has the power at the moment and what are they fighting for and who's winning and losing at any particular moment. And that helped me when you just get one of those furiously shot and edited action scenes like, oh, what's even happening here? But if you can pick the important beats, like this person takes a punch to the face and stumbles back, this person gets tripped, I started to find myself kind of honing in and getting a knack for action scenes, which is not like the kind of thing I write. I don't write a lot of action stuff, but I find myself really zeroing in on those kinds of scenes. And when they're going fast and furious, you just have to pick the important beats. This punch is important because it's part of the story that the hero got punched in the face for this part, or this move was important because they wrestled free or whatever. So that's been a challenge that I really enjoyed, is finding my way around scenes that are not the kind of thing I would normally write, but figuring out how to make them work in a few sentences. Someone who is just listening to this, can they follow that fight? Does it make sense? Does it have a story? Can they follow who's winning and losing? Is a very fun challenge to face.
Beautiful example. I'd love to ask you, just based on your experience in audio description, as you said, that you show up and write, I'd imagine there's a lot of things that you're doing that you just are hoping continue or grow or continue to evolve. Are there any things that, when you think about audio description from your perspective, that's a David Strugar wish list of optimal audio description?
Heck yeah. I like to throw on a comfort movie in the background when I'm working, folding laundry, going to bed or whatever. And there's so many older movies. Audio description as a requirement has been fairly new. Streamers have just kind of recently jumped on it. So a lot of newer movies that come out will have it. But some of my older favorite movies that are not even that old, maybe from 10, 15 years ago, don't have audio description. And some of them are shown by clients that we have. And I just, every day, I log into work like, is that movie going to come through? Are they going to have us like go back in their library? I would love to do that movie. There are certain movies that I would love to write the description for. There are certain shows. I watched a lot of old mystery shows like Murder, She Wrote and Columbo, because mystery is one of my genres. And I would love for those to be accessible and inclusive. And I know that it's a more labor-intensive process to create the audio description than the closed captions, but I want those to be accessible. I would love for people like me who love those old shows to be able to still experience them, especially a mystery show. And like, you need to know what clue the detective just found. We want to stay in the loop. So I think about that a lot. Yeah, I have an inner wish list of movies and old shows where they wanted to hire me to describe all of MASH and be on board. I would love to just see like a really intensive drive to get more archival material described. This applies to new stuff too. I would like to see more, I'm not sure what the term would be, but like portability from one platform to another or one medium to another. I know there's stuff that I've worked on that has description on streaming. And then when the discs are released, it is not there. I'm like, but you have it. I know you have it. I did it. Why isn't it on there? That baffles me. And I know a lot of it is like legal stuff and licensing, and I get that. Or sometimes a movie will jump platforms and it won't have the description anymore, or they'll commission a whole new description, which just seems like a lot of extra time and money to do. And I get it. Again, there's legal stuff that's like out of my sphere of knowledge. I don't know how all that works, but I feel like that's a problem we could solve and a problem that's worth solving so that that accessibility can travel with our favorite movies and shows, and we can depend on knowing that it's there however we end up watching it.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I would just say as a sighted person, I was vaguely aware of audio description because when I was a kid, we got a new TV with a little SAP button and I poked it and was like, what is this? And I heard someone describing an episode of Masterpiece Theater. So I knew it was a thing that existed. And I got this job during the pandemic. I had been working in a coffee shop, and that just was not a good scene to be in during the pandemic. There's kind of a mass exodus. So I lived off my savings for a bit and was just like, what now? And I knew I needed something that I could do from home and applied to all kinds of jobs like this. And this one came along, and it was one of those things where this just fits. I've had lots of other jobs in my time. I have a film production degree. I've tried some various things. And for some reason, my brain wiring just makes this work for me. And I'm really happy that I found it. I'm happy that there are people like you who push and advocate for it so that it gets more widespread and people are more aware of it. I love mentioning in conversation because people always ask, what do you do for a living? And I say what I do. And even just over the past 3 years, it's been less and less people being like, what? You do audio production? Like, no, no, no. You do closed captions? No, no, no. I've been finding more and more people who actually know what it is. And that's really encouraging. I would love to get more feedback directly from the audience that I write for. Like I said, I stumbled across that blog, and that's about all that I've gotten. I visited the picket lines during the strikes this summer and made friends with somebody whose wife uses audio description. And I fell out of touch with him, but I'm trying to get back in touch because they wanted to talk to me about it and like give their feedback. I have a friend recently who went through some health issues that affected his vision and was trying to watch a show that I had worked on. So I knew it had description, and he was telling me, he's like, I'm trying to watch this show and get caught up, but my husband has to sit here and tell me what's happening. And I'm like, babe, you remember what I do for a living, right? Like, I can't like spill the beans and say, that's the show I work on, but nudge him in the right direction. He's like, oh yeah. And so eventually he tried it. And then on another phone call, he was like, I turned on the description. John doesn't need to be here anymore. And I totally get what's going on. And I understand what you do for a living. So I'm very happy to have found this job and found something that I feel like I'm good at and something that has benefited me creatively. And I also feel really grateful for the audience that exists for it, because I wouldn't have this really cool job if it weren't for everyone who needs it and everyone who advocates for it and pushes to have it included as much as we possibly can. So thank you to my audience in general, because I don't get to talk to my audience in general, but I'm really grateful that this job exists.
So someone's like, yeah, David Strugar, how do I find them on socials?
I'm not terribly active on social media at the moment. I have projects in the hopper that I want to get going. We're debating whether we do some sort of fundraiser for it or get a podcasting company to produce it. I don't know. So I may have to have more of a presence to get that. But my last name is spelled Strugar, Strugar. In the next few months, weeks, if you stumble upon a Kickstarter or some other site saying that David Strugar is getting his audio drama funded, it'd be a murder mystery audio drama, that would be me. Maybe in the next couple of years, my name will show up on screen on a TV show you watch. Who knows? But TBA on the social media links for right now.
Thanks so much for joining us, David.